all of it. But Matthew 23, Jesus spends a whole chapter ripping apart people that go to church. If you read the Bible, you will find Jesus yelling at people that go to church, go to temple, more than you will find him yelling at people that we would deem as sinners and people that didn't do things right. He yells at people like us more than he does those things. And so I think that means we need to perk our ears up, because some of you in this room, you've gone to church your whole life. Some of you guys are just kind of, this is your church. You just come here on Wednesday nights. You don't really go to church on Sundays. You have different groups of people that are in here. But the thing is, if you have some semblance of understanding of the church, Jesus, I think, is trying to tell us something through the things that he's trying to tell the Pharisees. All right? So, one of the things that we highlight, that are highlighted by Jesus, some issues that he sees in the Pharisees. And I'm going to read this for us. We're going to start in verse 1 of Matthew 23. I'm going to read it out of this Don't Climb Alone Bible. All right? This is what it says. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you." Stop right there. How, the Pharisees got to start feeling good right here. They're like, all right, we got Jesus telling them, listen to them. Sweet. This is good stuff. Wait for it. Mic drop. Here it comes. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Jesus is a big fan of the Bible. He loved the Word of God. The Word of God was not this big when he was talking. It was back the law, the Jewish Mosaic law that they had. He was a big fan of Moses. He liked the stuff the Pharisees were reading about and saying. However, their lives did not match up. How many of you guys know what that means? What were they? Hypocrites, right? Hypocrites. Hypocrites are people that say one thing and do another. They say that they believe. They've got all of these laws, all of these things. And he's like, listen, I love the law. Jesus is like, I'm a big fan of the law. I came to fulfill the law. But these guys that are telling you about it, don't do what they do. Don't do what they do. I don't want you to say yes or no to this, but I remember I've seen different situations where I've seen parents tell you to not do something, but then they themselves go out and do it. And I know a lot of you guys are like internally, every day, right? They say don't eat the chocolate, but then they eat the chocolate. I don't know. So, but here's the deal, guys. Jesus is telling us hypocrisy is a problem. It's an issue. Every one of us have times where we have said something and done the exact opposite. And so it is so important. Jesus is telling us, listen, you need to do what the Bible says. Don't necessarily listen to these guys, because these guys are not doing it right. They're not going about it the right way because they're hypocritical. They're not saying what they mean. They say it and then they do whatever the heck they want. They change it up. But and another thing you saw in this passage is that they weren't even willing to lift a finger to help them out. A lot of times you'll see different leaders, like people in the military. I think about like a guy that is all the way up to like admiral rank. Okay, that means he's been around for a while. There was a time in his life where he was a private. He was down at the bottom. Now, he's experienced a lot of different things, but what would you feel like if somebody was just given and they became admiral and they didn't do a thing? They were just like, you know what, they didn't work their way up, they didn't do those things, and now that they're admiral, now they're telling everyone else to do that stuff. How would that make you feel? It'd be unfair, right? And it'd be a hard time listening, because here in this passage, we're telling them, the Pharisees are telling them to do all sorts of stuff, but they're not willing to help them out at all. They're just like, yeah, you guys just do that. Go take care of that. Make that happen. But he's not willing. He's like, oh, I'm the admiral. I don't do any of that stuff. But you guys know that our admiral, the guy we follow, Jesus, got down on his hands and knees and washed people's stinky feet. He gave an example of servanthood. He gave this example that it wasn't about us, it's about him, and he gave us that humble example by getting down and doing that. So another thing that he shows us here, if we keep reading the passage, we certainly learn another thing about these Pharisees that I think will show us the selfishness angle. It says this in verse 5. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. Pharisees were in it because they loved being in the middle of it all. They wanted people to see them. I know you guys have a lot of issues wearing your phylacteries too wide and your tassels a little too long. I know that's something that you struggle with in middle school. You gotta know what those things are. Okay, so so here's the deal. Like for them, what people would do, like imagine this way. I grew up in this kind of tradition. My dad, when he would preach, and what would make him very different than all the rest of us that we were, he actually wore a robe, and he wore this colorful thing that he would put around, and it would be very easy to spot. That's the pastor. That's the guy, because he wore all that stuff. Well, the Pharisees wore all of these things to say, like, hey, look at me, I'm really religious. I'm really into God. Look at me. A lot of you guys, I've seen you guys, we got a Jesus t-shirt here, right? She's tearing it up. We got some other people wearing some, back in the day, it's WWJD bracelets, right? People are wearing all of you got your Christian hat, your Christian t-shirt, your Christian shoes, your Christian underwear, your Christian, your Christian blanket, everything Christian, right? Which I think is silly, by the way, because everything's holy. God is the one that makes that. We don't claim different things that are Christian, And so it's just pretty wild in that way. But think about this. They wanted to make it all about them. The Pharisees were obsessed with making it all about them. So actually what they would do is they would go into the middle of the streets and they'd just pray out loud so people could hear them pray. Because they thought it was all about them. And they loved going to banquets and having the table and the seat that was set just for them. Now some of us in this room struggle because it is really nice to be all about us sometimes. We like that. We like people to make a big deal about us. Some of you guys don't. I got one of our students is like, dude, anyone that cheers for me at games, I hate it. I hate it. I don't want anyone to look at me. But there's some people that love it. They love the attention to be brought to them. Love the attention to be brought, that they would know that, oh man, I'm honored. Look at all the people that do this for me. But here's the deal. That Jesus is rebuking that kind of an attitude, because there are so many things that I want you guys to know this, because I think it's pretty powerful. I don't know if you guys realize this, but while we hang out on Wednesday nights, there's about 5 or 6 people that get together every week, and they pray for our church. They spend time for about an hour, a little over an hour, and they go through a list of prayer needs for people that are sick, people that are, you guys, the youth ministry. They pray for, everything that's going on. They pray for our missionaries. Every week, we go through this list and they prayed for it. Now, I bet if I asked you who those people were, you wouldn't know. But I'm telling you, I believe that the stuff that they're doing in that room, between 5 or 6 people praying to God, does a lot more good than some of the stuff that I do every day. Because I believe that prayer is stinking powerful. And prayer isn't about us. The Bible actually tells us to go behind a closed door, close the door, and pray. It's not about getting out there, letting everybody see you, making it look like you're really religious and have it all together. It's about your relationship, your personal relationship with God. So if we continue on, we hear these bad things, but then there's this encouragement that comes in the last part that we're going to read. And that's verses 8 to 12. He says this to these Pharisees: "But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you called to be instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Now, I believe that's telling us that Jesus doesn't want us to miss the main thing. The main thing is Him. The main thing is Him. And a lot of times we get so caught up in our little kingdom that we're building, and that we're missing out on the mosaic that He's painting that's so much bigger than we can even grasp. And here's the deal. Jesus gives you an option. He says, if you want to make life about you, you're going to get humbled at some point. If you want to make life all about what you want, if you want to exalt yourself, the Bible, he just tells us, listen, those who exalt themselves will be humbled. And that's not a great place to be in, because when you think you're up here and you think you've achieved everything, guys, if you look at a lot of people that are successful in our world, that think it's all about them, you see moments where they get humbled and everybody gets to watch. Because they're in this position of power, they're in this position of influence, and they just get knocked down because they were exalting themselves. They made life all about them. I don't know if you guys know, I mentioned it a while ago, but Floyd Mayweather is a guy. If you guys know Floyd Mayweather, this is a boxer. He just boxed in this fight against Manny Pacquiao. It was the most expensive fight in the history of the world. And he is obsessed with himself. He said in an interview, nobody loves Floyd Mayweather more than Floyd Mayweather. He's a big fan of himself. He thinks he's pretty awesome. He's also been a guy that's been arrested for 5 times for beating women in relationships. Not a really great guy, but he's really into himself and thinks he's pretty great. I'm going to tell you guys that the Bible makes it very clear for us that if you want to experience exaltation, being exalted, and experience what it looks like, get on your hands and knees and begin to serve. Do things not to be noticed. Do things so that he's noticed. You exist and our life exists when we are at our best. People remember his name and not ours. Because it's not about us. It's all about him. And he's telling us, listen, you're missing out if you think life is about you. For the longest time, they thought that the earth was the center of the world, the center of the known universe. And then we find out, you begin to see all of these different planets and galaxies and solar systems that exist. And then there's this little dot on a dot on a dot on a dot that is us on this tiny planet in the midst of thousands and millions of galaxies and stars that it's just crazy that we think it's all about us. So I want to encourage you guys that God desires that we learn as church people, as people that hang out in the church and choose to be here on a Wednesday night, that Jesus has got some harsh words for us. He says these things to the Pharisees, and we can point and say, oh yeah, look at them, just like we talked about last week. We talked about the log in our eye, the speck of sawdust in theirs. We have these moments where we read about villains, we read about people in the Bible, and we're like, oh man, they're awful, aren't they? But I encourage us in all of these lessons, we have 3 more of these to go. Always be looking in the mirror first. Always be a person saying, yeah, you know what? There is a bit of me in that person. There is a bit of that anger, that jealousy, or that inappropriate behavior, or the way that I do things. Because like I said, Pharisees were religious church people. And if you're a church person here and you're hanging out with us, this is really applicable to us. And so I want to ask some questions. I want some questions to lead you into your small groups and go from there. But first thing is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how selfish would you say you are? 1 being you're Jesus, and 10 being it's all about you. All right? So 1 being you're Jesus. So if there are some 1s out there, I'd love to meet you and shake your hand. That's amazing. So I hope that would be awesome. And then I want to ask you, are you happy with where you currently are? Are you happy with it? Because some of us are really happy with it being all about us. If we're honest. We really we love it. We think it's great. However, like I said, the longer you keep this act up, the worse the fall is going to be when God humbles you and knocks you down. So the next thing I want to throw out to you is, how can you better be a servant this week and put God and others above yourself? Because like I said, it's not about you. And how many of you guys have been on a mission trip with us before? Anyone in Buffalo mission trip, anything, or gone to hang out with the Dream Center? Guys, I've been on those trips with you, and you've said, man, I love it. I don't want to go home. And I don't believe, there's something sweet about hanging out with everybody, but there's also, we're missing out on something when we make it all about us, because we're missing out on the blessing of serving others. The Bible tells us it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. But we get really caught up on the receiving stuff. We get really excited about getting things and not understanding that God's like, listen, I want to bless you. so that you can give to others. Because when you give